Now we're going to redo the whole question, but this time using the first in, first out method. You'll see I have used the same timeline again. I didn't spend any time redrawing the timeline. All of the information I need is here. Okay, so let's look at how step 2, which was to account for the rands coming into the process, is now different. Remember, on the first in, first out method, we are only interested in the costs incurred in this year. Why? Because the costs of the opening work in progress will automatically go towards the completed units. Why? Because the units that came into the process incomplete, the units that were incomplete from last year are the first to be finished. So we do not get a weighted average unit cost combining the cost of last year and the cost of this year. We are only interested in the current cost. What's important to notice is that this current cost is the same current cost as what we used in the weighted average method. The only difference is that now we do not add the opening work in progress. The current cost for process 1 for raw materials was 270,000 and for conversion 219,000. This was given. Right. Our step 3 is going to look a little bit different. Remember, step 3 is our equivalent units. This is units going out of the process. Now, step 3 is going to be a little bit different. Because we didn't combine the cost of opening work in progress in step 2, we need to account for the costs to finish opening work in progress in step 3. This is very important. This is the units or the equivalent units to finish opening work in progress. It's not what was already done. It is what must still be done. So now we go back to our timeline and we look at the opening work in progress that I've got here on top. For process 1, the opening work in progress was at 25%. So now we are interested in the area that is to the right of the opening work in progress, the area that I've shown here in green. What must still be done to opening work in progress to complete it? So if you look there, raw material gets added at the beginning of process 1. The opening work in progress is at 25% and is going until completion. This opening work in progress never passes the point where raw material is added. So, how much raw material must be added to finish the opening work in progress? Nothing. It got all the raw material it needed in the previous accounting period. Conversion costs are different. Because conversion costs happen evenly throughout the process, to get this product from 25% to completion, we still need to add 75% of the conversion costs. So, opening work in progress, 7,500 units, 75% of that gives us the equivalent of 5,225 units. Remember, this is to finish the opening work in progress. Now, when we did weighted average method, we were looking at units completed and transferred. This is still interesting. I put them here in brackets because we don't really refer to them like that in the FIFO method. However, it's still what we're looking for. The units completed and transferred were 25,000. We need to account for all of those units. The difference is some of the units that were completed and transferred came from opening work in progress. So to put units completed and transferred here would be incorrect. We are more interested in units that were started in this year and completed in this year. units started and completed. Now, units started and completed together with the units that were started last year but completed this year will still give you the units completed and transferred. So it's not really that different from the weighted average method. We're just separating the opening work in progress from the new units that were started this year. Now, where do we get this figure? There's actually two ways of calculating it. We're looking for units that were started this year and completed this year. So we can look at units that were started this year, 22,500. How many units were not completed? 5,000. So the difference between that is 17,500 units completed, started this year and completed this year. You can also look at it this way. The opening work in progress was 7,500. They were finished first. Now, we completed and transferred a total of 25,000, but 7,500 of those came from opening stock. So the difference between those two will also give you 17,500. Similar as to units completed and transferred in the weighted average method, you can just know that these units are complete for raw material and complete for conversion. You do not need to do any equivalent unit calculation. Why? Because of the name. It tells you these are units that are completed. However, closing work in progress is different. These are units that are not completed. We need to look at what was the equivalent of raw material, or the equivalent units of raw material added, and the equivalent units of conversion. Now, if you go to your timeline, now we're dealing again with the closing work in progress. We are interested in the work that was already done to get us to 85%. For raw materials, we started the process and immediately we add the raw materials. Then we carry on until we stop. By the time that we stopped at 85%, we have already added all of the raw materials. So the entire 5,000 goes in as an equivalent unit for closing work in progress for raw materials. However, conversion is different. We start at the beginning of the process, work our way all the way up to 85%, and then we stop. So having finished 5,000 units up to a level of 85% is equivalent to having finished 4,250 units. I hope that you notice that the closing work in progress is the same for WAM and FIFO. This figure is not different. The only difference between WAM and FIFO is the treatment of the opening work in progress. Now we can add our equivalent units up. For raw material, we have the equivalent of 22,500 units completed, and for conversion, the equivalent of 27,375. And now to get our cost per unit, we divide the current cost only by our total equivalent units to get a cost per unit of 12, and for raw materials, and a cost per unit of 8 for conversion. Add them together and we find that the average cost of making one product in process 1 on the FIFO method, counted for on the FIFO method, is 20 Rand. The last step is to calculate the cost of the units coming out of the process. We are still interested in units completed and transferred. Remember, now they just come from opening work in progress. Why? Because opening work in progress is completed first. Then there were costs to finish opening work in progress, and then there were the new units started and completed. Opening work in progress This figure was given in the question. This is the cost of the raw material and the conversion that came from the previous accounting period. Then, to finish the opening work in progress, we don't need to add any raw material. So for raw material, it is 0 times 12. We do, however, need to add conversion. How much? The equivalent of 5,625 units at a cost of 8 Rand per unit, giving us 45,000 Rand. And then units started and completed, 17,500 units at a full product cost of average product cost of 20 Rand, giving you 350,000 Rand. The total cost of units completed and transferred into the next process, 536,000. And the total cost of the closing work in progress, it consists of raw material, the equivalent of 5,000 units at 12 Rand, giving us 60,000 Rand. For conversion, we have the equivalent of 4,250 units at 8 Rand, giving us 34,000 Rand, giving you a total cost for closing work in progress of 94,000 Rand. Now, it is very, very important to notice that these two figures, if you add them together, you will not get that total. This is different than WAM. Why? Because this is only the current cost. This includes the opening work in progress. So that's not a mistake if this total doesn't add up to that total. Right, that was process 1. We are going to need this amount when we get to process 2. Process 2 on the FIFO method. We've done our timeline. I'm not going to do a new timeline. It's identical to what we've been using. Step 2 is about the rands coming into the process. But remember, because it's FIFO, we are only interested in the current costs. We look at all of the inputs into the process. So process 2 gets an input from process 1. We add additional raw materials and we add additional conversion costs. Now, what is the cost or the current cost coming in from process 1? That is what we just calculated. This was not given. This was your answer for completed and transferred in the previous step. Raw material cost was given, 126,700, sorry, and then the current cost for conversion was given as 86,400. Sorry. Current cost of conversion was given as 309,300. We do not add the opening work in progress here because this does not form part of the current production costs. Step 3 is to calculate the equivalent units. Now, remember, when we do the first in, first out method, we are interested in finding out how much work must be done to finish the opening work in progress. We are also interested in the new units started and completed, and we are still looking at how many units were incomplete at the end of the accounting period, the closing work in progress. So we need to go back to our timeline. Opening work in progress on the top of process 2 was at 70%. We are interested in the portion to the right. We are interested in the portion to finish the opening work in progress. We're not interested in what happened last year. We're interested in what must still happen this year. Now, if you look at your timeline, you can almost imagine you starting at 70% and you are walking towards the end. Do you pass the point where raw materials are added? No. Raw materials are added at 50%. So, do you need to add any raw materials to finish the opening work in progress? No. For raw materials, it is 0. In terms of conversion, you still need to do 30% of the work. So, opening work in progress of 3,800 require 30% of the work to be done, so that is equivalent to 1,140 units that still need to be done. Now, I've left process 1 out until now. Let's talk about process 1. These are the units transferred in from process 1. The big question is, how much must you still do to finish the opening work in progress of process 1? Remember, process 1 was completed before it was transferred into process 2. So there is nothing to be done. You don't have to think about this one. It is going to be 0 because process 1 was complete. There's no work to be done to complete the opening work in progress. The next piece of information we need are the units started and completed. Now, remember, we're not given the units started and completed, but we're given the units started and the units not completed. So the difference between these two is going to be the units started and completed. Or we can look at the units completed, 21,900. Some of those units came from opening stock, 3,800 of them. So the difference between the units completed and the units that came from the previous year are the units that were started this year and completed this year. Again, there's no thinking to be done about these units. The minute you have the figure, you can fill it in everywhere. Why? Because these units were started and completed. So in terms of equivalent units, they are complete. There's no calculation to be done. You don't have to convert them into equivalent units. They are full, complete units. Closing work in progress is different. Closing work in progress is that work which we started this year but did not finish. If you look on your timeline, we started at the beginning of process 2 and we worked all the way up to 20%. Now, we're interested in this red portion, the portion that is to the left of the closing work in progress. In terms of raw material, let's start again with raw material. In terms of raw material, did you reach the point where raw material gets added by the time you stopped? No. So, how many raw materials did you add? Nothing. You didn't add any raw materials. You got from 0 to 20. You stopped before the raw materials are added, so you did not add any raw materials. In terms of conversion, we took these units and we converted them up to 20% completion. 6,900 of them. So 6,900 units, 20% complete, is the equivalent of 1,380 units complete. I left process 1 for the end again because I just want to discuss it. Process 1 is complete. Remember, when you finish process 1, it gets transferred to process 2. It doesn't get transferred before it's completed. Therefore, anything coming from process 1 is 100% complete. Units coming from the previous process are always 100% complete in terms of equivalent units. And that is exactly the same reason why this was 0. Nothing needs to be done. Right, now you can add these together to get your total equivalent units. For the previous process, it is 25,000. For raw materials, 18,100. And for conversion, 20,620. Lastly, we get our cost per unit. Cost per unit we get by dividing the current cost by the total equivalent units we calculated over there. And we get 21 Rand and 44 cents for the previous process. We take the current cost of raw materials divided by the equivalent units, and we get 7 Rand. And we take the the current cost of conversion divided by the total equivalent units, and we get 15 Rand. Very, very important. This is the cost of the current year's production only. Why? Because in FIFO, we like to separate the current year's production cost from previous year's production costs. And we find that the total cost of one product, fully complete, is 43 Rand and 44 cents. Even though we are working on the FIFO method, this is still an average cost, because process costing calculates an average product cost. It's a very accurate average, but this remains an average. We're almost done. Step number 4 is to calculate the cost of the output from the process. So we have the units completed and transferred. These came from opening work in progress. We are given these amounts. The raw materials for opening work in progress is 70,400. The conversion cost for opening work in progress, is 86,460, and the opening work in progress for process 1 is 80,750, giving us a total cost of opening work in progress of $237,610. That is what came in, or those were the figures given for the opening work in progress, the previous opening work in progress costs. Then there are the costs to finish this opening work in progress. This is this column. In terms of raw material, we do not need to spend anything to finish. In terms of process 1, we do not need to spend anything to finish. But in terms of conversion, we need to finish the equivalent of 1,140 units. It costs us 15 Rand per unit, so the cost to finish those opening work in progress units is 17,100. And then we have new units started and completed. This is 18,100 units at an average product cost of 43 Rand and 44 cents, which gives us 786,264 for a total cost of units completed and transferred of 1,040,974. Then the cost of our closing work in progress. This consists of process 1, 6,900 units at a cost of 21 Rand 44 cents, which is 147,936. Raw materials 0, because raw materials were not yet added to the closing work in progress. And then the costs of conversion, which was 1,380, or rather the equivalent of 1,380 units at 15 Rand per unit, giving us a cost of 20,700. And if we add those together, we get the cost of our closing work in progress of 168,636. Again, very important to notice that these totals will not necessarily balance, will definitely not balance to these totals. Why? Because when we do FIFO, our step 2 and 3 only calculate the cost of current production. When we get to step 4 and we calculate the final cost of the finished goods, we add the opening work in progress, which is not included over there. So these will not balance. Okay, that was example number 5. Please make sure that you understand all of the principles that I've covered and that you are comfortable with these calculations as well as the timeline, because in Monday's class I am going to introduce losses, which makes the calculations a little bit more complicated than what they've been up to now. Thank you and good luck.